Welcome to another Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric. Today's video is going to be split up into a couple different sections because as I was finishing up my last project, I came to the conclusion that I really wanted to rip it out and use the yarn for a different project. And that's sometimes what happens when we have a fiber that we spin that we might think is going to work for next to skin items. But then once it's knitted or crocheted or woven, we go, it's probably not quite as soft as we'd hoped it was going to be. Not as lacking in scratch factor. So that I wanted to share with you the frogging and the why I decided to do to change my mind in essence. So that's what this next section is going to be. Afterwards, I will come back and I will talk more about how we need to, when we get fiber, when we source fiber, when we're gifted fiber, how to decide, is it going to be something that we use as a utility item, or is it going to be something that we use as a next to skin? There's a lot of fiber out there that we would never put next to our faces or, our foreheads or anything like that, or even our hands and our arms or our feet. But is really good fiber for other projects. Whether we knit them, knit them, or we weave them, or we crochet them, these fibers can be really quite fun to spin. They can have, they can give us a challenge. They can broaden our understanding and our skill in spinning and what our spun fibers can be used for. So that's what I'm going to come back and talk to you about after this next section. So I hope you will stick with me, and I will now move to my past self and we'll see me frogging a hat. In my last video that I shared, the short one where I talked about my new lighting situation and some kind of mystery fiber, some mystery yarn that had been languishing in my stash for quite some time, I mentioned how I was going to knit this yarn into a hat. At that time, before I started knitting, I couldn't really remember having spun this. I couldn't remember. I kind of had a vague feeling about the fiber, the black gray fiber, but I couldn't really remember exactly when it had been spun. Well, as I started knitting, I realized that this was actually some yarn that my daughter had spun while she was in college. And it was some fiber that I had put together for her as some practice spins. It was a CVM cross that was a little bit coarse in places, not as soft and fine as most of the CVM that I spin, but it was a fabulous fiber to give to her to practice with because it had longer staple length. And the colored fiber in it is actually a commercial fiber that we ended up getting at a trunk sale, a yard sale type situation. And it is listed as an Angora, but I've never really truly been 100% convinced that's what it was. Either way, it takes dye quite well. And one of the skeins, as I did say, does have some Angora that I blended into the gray fiber before she spun it. So I was hoping that this fiber would make a good hat, but as I was a little worried about, the coarse bits make it to where if you have really tough skin, you would have no problem wearing this as a hat. It's just bordering on a little too bit scratchy for me to wear it. And as I knit it up, I kept thinking, this fiber, this yarn would be perfect for a video that I wanted to share, a project I wanted to share this month. So I went ahead and finished knitting it because I was doing this as a project for Ravelenics, and it is a hat that I've posted a picture on Instagram. I will share it here as well. It is a hat that I've shared on Instagram. It is a project that is in my Ravelry page. But the more I knit with it, the more I was certain this would make a wonderful bag. And later in the video, probably going to be recorded after I do some knitting, I will share with you some other utility items that I've made out of less than fine, less than top grade soft knitting fiber. So what I wanted to come and quickly do, though, is I figured if I was going to frog this hat, and see, by the time I got to the end, I knew I really did not want to cut things off. So I finished the one skein, or as the one ball, and oh, little trick, these little hair clips, they are fabulous at holding the ball of yarn from unwinding. Just use them to hold that there. So I knew that I was going to want to frog this. So I didn't cut off any of the ends. I just wove the ends in, and I left the tail so that I could frog this project. But rather than see me fiddle and fight here with the getting it out of here, I'm going to cut for a moment, and I'll be back in just a few moments to show you how I'm going to rip out all these stitches. So I'll be right back in a moment. Okay, so I'm back, and I have taken the ball of yarn that I'd run out of, that I had used to feed through all my loose stitches. I've taken it back. So what I'm going to do, I did knit this with two balls of yarn, but when I rip this, because I know I'm going to knit my bag with the 2 strands as well, I am just going to go ahead and add it to the ball that I hadn't run out of. I do have more of the, 2 more balls of yarn. So I'm just going to, let me pull this up here so you can see. I'm just going to go ahead and start ripping out all of my knitted stitches. Because it's just a tube. And I'm just going to make one big granny ball of yarn, so that when I'm ready to start knitting again, which will be as soon as I have this ripped, I can just start knitting with this large ball. And when the one strand runs out, I'll just graft on another strand again. So this is me ripping out the hat that I made because, as I suspected, I wasn't going to be very happy with it, but it was fun to knit. It was a wonderful thing. I was watching the Olympics. I was watching some cross-country skiing. I was watching some ski jump, and it was a really nice way to keep my hands busy. So as soon as I have this ripped and I start knitting on the next hat, I'm hoping to come back and finish this video and have a finished bag to share with you, and a few other utility knits made out of scratchy yarns from scratchy fibers. So we'll see you as soon as I have this ripped, knitted, and I get back to you. So ripping out that hat was a really smart thing for me to do, because after I knit up the bag that I envisioned in my mind, I discovered there were some issues with the fiber and the dyeing process that I'd used when I had dyed the fiber. So if I had left it as a hat, it may or may not have withstood even hand washing, it seems. So the bag, let's start with that. This is the finished bag. Now you may notice from the past clip, it's not the same color. It's not anywhere close to the same color, because what I discovered is that commercial, or that mill spun fiber that I had dyed, that my daughter had plied with her hand spun single, while it took dye really nicely, it didn't hold on to dye at all when I put my bag in boiling water to try to felt it. Every single bit of that dye washed out. I suspect it is because that mill spun fiber of unknown, type. I don't know. I doubt, based on how it's reacted, it was not the Angora that the cone was labeled as. It was obviously a recycled cone. It was mill spun, but I suspect that it had an oil or something of that nature on it from the mill process, because every single bit of that color washed out when I got the water up to the boiling soapy temperature, the soapy boiling water that I was using to try to really felt it down. It wasn't felting as well as I wanted it to, so I really went to town with the whole boiling the wool concept, and all the dye came out of it. So I took that water, poured it out, added fresh water, threw in a bunch of dye, and I ended up with this color, and I'm really quite pleased with it. As much as I did kind of like the way the other color looked, this is really quite a nice finished object. Now, right now it has a UFO in it, and to make it stand up, let me see if there we go. I have lined it with, it's actually a type of foam lining that you can get to make handbags with. And it's actually a fusible, so I fused some fabric onto it, hand stitched it in place. It has a piece on the bottom. It's really easy if I ever want to wash the bag. I can actually just take out my hand stitching at the top, pull the liner out, wash the bag, put it all back in. I'm thrilled, because what I kept envisioning was something that was more on the lines of a basket rather than a bag. The bottom, and it has some of the sticky paper from when I was doing the lining. It doesn't really have a seam. Let me see, there we go. It's seamless, because I used the same technique that I use when I'm doing toe-up socks as a way to cast on, the same cast on. And I'll put a link in the description below to the sock instruction that I basically did in this large size. So I made this basket bag, and I love it. And it's, as I said in the earlier clip, it's just bordering on a little too scratchy. This, though, is perfect because it's deep and it's rich, and the depth of color is because of the black in the original wool. The black gray fibers really took the color well. So I wanted to show you that. That's my my project. If you're on Ravelry and you check out my page, there's pictures of the process. My Instagram, I have a few more pictures as well. So if you want to check those out, feel free. But I want to get on to why we have one type of spinning versus another for these kind of projects. So some animals produce just scratchy fiber, period. Some animals will have a multi-coat, dual coat. This is some combed top from the Herdwick breed of sheep. It's a combed top, and it is the Kemp fibers, not the undercoat. So I have knit with some Herdwick undercoat, and it's lovely. And for some people, it actually may be really next to skin soft. But the Kemp would be a bit more scratchy. However, it is, I'm trying to find an end. Ah, there we go, an end. Okay. So there's the staple length. And as far as coarse fibers go, it's got a nice feel to it. And if you've watched my other videos, you'll know I like spinning with things like Leicester long wool, which is a coarser fiber. In fact, my UFO project is Leicester long wool. And it is an amigurumi, a stuffed animal that has not yet been finished from last summer. So I like using fibers that are longer, there's great property value in them. But one of the things that is a little different with working with something like this, a hemp fiber versus a long wool, if you could see my lap right now, you would see it's covered in short and long and different colors, and it's not a consistent. When I work with the Leicester long wool, I have long, consistent staple. This, on the other hand, is the guard hair of a dual coated sheep. I've also spun with the guard hair of camel. I have spun with the guard hair of bison, the American buffalo. And it just wants to go everywhere. It pokes out. And showing you the herdwick, that is the same herdwick fiber here when it's been spun, knitted, and felted. Now the interesting thing, much like this project, it doesn't felt completely closed. And I'm trying to see if I can get it in close. You can kind of still see some of the knitting loops. So it does felt, but it doesn't really mesh together. But it's perfect for this little bunny bag that I made, which is needle felted on to this bag. And this is another example. There's no seam at the bottom because, again, I cast on using a toe up sock cast on. So there's no seam anywhere. I just cast on, knit around just like with a sock. But in this case, it's a bag. And it's a wonderful, wonderful little utility bag that I made for my daughter. I used some purchased felted wool for the handle. I needle felted in some other wool, just to make it a little bit interesting here at the top. And then I needle felted a bunny rabbit out of some other fiber. So the texture of it, though, this is what I want to really share. Fiber that I wouldn't necessarily put against my skin has so much wonderful texture. It is, and I would imagine if you wove with it, it would be just as wonderful. It does shed. Before I felted it, it would continue to, spin it, and it will get, that will hold most of the fiber in. But once it was felted, it doesn't shed anymore. This, on the other hand, if you're going to spin something like this, this stuff really does. It's all sorts of different sizes and textures and consistencies. So a drop cloth, a lap cloth is really a good thing to have in this. But spinning it's a new type of spinning. It's a challenge. It's something different. And it can be so much fun. And it will help you develop your skill. Much like when you want to start spinning things like silk, you have to change the way your hands will have to adjust. The texture will be different. It might slip through your fingers more. When spinning these other coarser wools or hemp fibers, you have to adjust. Your fingers have to adjust. You become more nuanced in your spinning. And this is a bag I've shown before, and this is one way of helping one way of dealing with some of these different fibers. Now, in this top section, as I've mentioned in another video showing this, There is, I think, some Shetland in the bottom, but all the top of it is alpaca. And it's alpaca seconds that might have otherwise ended up in the compost. I actually think it when I picked up these seconds, the person was intending to send them to help with oil spills, is what they said. So this is fiber that normally doesn't get spun. And some of it was really no longer staple length than this. And that can be problematic. And the other part of it was very hair-like, not very wool-like. But this stuff at the top, this is what I want to share. This stuff at the top, it was extremely short, staple length, very pokey, lots of little tiny ends, not soft, not something I want next to my skin. This is actually, even though it's alpaca, and from an alpaca that had in its main part of its coat a really nice soft alpaca, this is really scratchy. This is actually scratchier than this. So the way I ended up working with that fiber is I took a single of wool that I had spun, any mid-length, mid-grade, any single that I would say stay away from your really fine merinos and such, but any single of wool that you've spun can be used as a core that then you spin this into. And that's what I did with this alpaca, is I used it as a bit of a core spun. And it created a textured, I now have put this against my face, and I have fluff on my face. But because it was such a short staple length, as opposed to this Herdwick that has some long staple and some short to it, I found it was so much easier to control if, rather than trying to spin it as a single, I spun it onto something that was already there. There's tons of different books and materials out there talking about coarse spinning. Basically what I did is I just took a strand and just started letting it spin into it, and then crocheted in this case, and then felted it. So even though you can see holes going through, this has been felted. This has been tossed in to a bowl of water, lots of suds, mushed around quite a bit in order to make this bag. So again, fibers don't necessarily all fit into the category of something we want to wear against our skin. But that doesn't mean they don't have a place. The difference I've found in spinning fiber that I'm going to use for a new utility project, whether it's a bag, I like to do bags, whether it's a bag or it's outer mittens with an inner lining, whether it's going to be used, I have some that was woven into, whatever you want to weave it into. When you're going to do something that is going to be an outerwear or a utility item that isn't next to our skin, sometimes the fibers, in almost all the cases, the fiber that you're going to be spinning is not going to behave the same way a nice, crimpy, soft wool is going to behave. And the very best advice I can give you is to simply take a section and see what it feels like, see what it wants to spin as. Some of it's going to need a higher twist, because when it looks like hair rather than looks like a fluffy little cloud, it's probably not going to grip into itself as much as a fluffy little cloud would. So you're going to need to experiment. You're going to need to see how it feels in your hand. You're going to need to see how much twist you need in it versus how much angle of twist. And just, You're just going to have to experiment, because these fibers oftentimes do work out better if they are a worsted spin, meaning all the fibers are more aligned, as in they've been combed together, versus carded and fluffed together. Example. So this fiber, this is a lock of fiber, and it is definitely something that I could spin in a worsted fashion. I could spin it to be nice and straight and keep all the fibers together, and it would make a very strong yarn, but it's still going to be nice and soft to my skin because the fiber itself is nice and soft and fluffy. And if I bring it up here, let me see if I can get it to, hold on, come in. Maybe it might be easier if I get one of the darker. Perfect. Here's some. If I bring that in close, do you see the bounce and the crimp? That crimp, that fiber really wants to grip into itself. And if you notice, that fiber really wants to be fluffy. So can I spin it worsted? Certainly. And I have done this worsted. You will get a strong, very uniform yarn. It's going to be very durable. It's going to be good for a lot of different projects, but it's not going to be light and fluffy if I do it with the worsted spin as much as if I do it with a woolen spin. Now, when I compare that to this Kemp fiber, this the guard hair, you will notice light and fluffy. This does not become light and fluffy. This actually, amazingly enough, looks a lot like my hair. And if you've ever tried to spin with your hair, you can definitely do it, but it doesn't want to hold together as much. So you need to have more twist. So you want to experiment. You want to play. You want to give it a try. And it doesn't hurt to get a library of these kind of things on hand and to look up. This type of breed lends itself to this type of spinning or this type of project. But sometimes we're gifted with fiber that we just don't know what it is, where it came from, or how we can't look it up. The rule of thumb I go with, if it looks like my hair, I probably want to spin it worsted. If it looks like bunny fluff when it's opened up and it feels nice and soft, I probably want to spin it a woolen. And of course there's semi-woolen, semi-worsted, but that's the rules of thumb I tend to follow. So I hope this has been somewhat inspirational, if not educational. Sorry if this video has gone a little bit long. I did want to try to keep it, I want to try to keep most of my videos under a half hour long. However, I don't always succeed. But I do hope it has given you some inspiration and, most importantly, desire to try. And if you have to frog something, then frog it. If you have to over dye it because you don't like the way the dye looked, then do so. Remember, great advice that I was given a number of years ago. It's yours. It's your project. It's your yarn. It's your fiber. If you loved that hank of fiber that you bought at a fair, you loved it, but you have no idea how it's going to spin up, card it. Take it out of the roving format and card it into roll logs. Blend the colors together. And if when you're done and you've knit up the project and you're like, oh my goodness, I still don't like it, try throwing some dye over it. You might like it better. The one thing is, as long as you don't have a problem with dark brown or dark black, you can always keep throwing more dye at it to see what you get. But the item has value. The journey has value if you don't get frustrated, if you don't give up, if you don't allow frustration or disappointment to rule the day. Even this bag, which at one time looked like a clown's wig. The color, I keep thinking I want to actually throw it in a dye bath because it's not really an appealing color. But I leave it because it's another example of one of my favorite projects. It's a crocheted bag. It's so wonderful to take with me. It fits in a suitcase really well. So if I really just need a quick satchel type bag, it works. But I keep it in this color because it's a reminder. Every time I share it and show it, it's a reminder that the journey really is so much more important than our expectation. Our expectation can sometimes be the biggest stumbling block we have. I expected to have a hat that was black and multicolored speckles. In the end, I have a wonderful basket bag in this deep, dark, Chinese red black tone. I'm much happier with this than what my expectation started out with. So that's my message for you today. Remember, our expectations can sometimes be our biggest roadblocks. Fiber, whatever the source, can be fun to experiment, and we can learn new skills and new knowledge just from playing. And we may discover we don't like spinning it. I actually don't mind spinning it, even though it does make a mess. We may discover that something that we didn't know how to use becomes the most adorable thing if we leave expectation behind and instead let the journey take us where it's going to take us and have joy and fun while we do it. So I hope to see you again soon. I hope this video has brought you a little bit of joy, and I hope it's helped you unwind a little bit with fiber and fabric this week. And until I see you again soon, very soon, I hope, stay safe, be happy, find the joy, and find some time to unwind with fiber and fabric.